I'm Howard Lederer, and welcome to the Secrets of No Limit Hold'em. More than 150 million players are playing poker worldwide, and more of that game is No Limit Hold'em. It's a game that offers a tremendous amount of excitement. There's bluffing, there's luck, and there's also a lot of skill. It's also the game that more and more players are playing in poker tournaments. It is a tremendous poker tournament game. I want to go over a few of the things that we're going to look at in this tape that are going to allow you to very quickly move your game from the beginner level to maybe the intermediate level. We're going to first look at how we set up a home poker game or poker tournament, because if you can't practice at home with your friends, it's going to be very hard to improve quickly. And then once I've done that, I'm going to try and give you some of the key skills that it's going to take to win in those poker games and beat your friends. And trust me, it's always more fun to play poker when you're winning.
Well, before we get into the setup of a home poker tournament, I'd like you to note that although I suggest that each player start with $1,000, it's $1,000 in chips. You can be playing for bragging rights, you could be playing for cereal box tops, you could be playing for $1. It doesn't matter. It just makes the tournament go more smoothly if everyone starts with $1,000 in chips. It allows us to standardize the tournament structure, and you're going to have a lot more fun using chips instead of matchsticks or coins or whatever else you might find lying around the house.
Okay, I now wanted to look at the structure and setup for a home No Limit Hold'em tournament. You may want to refer to the structure for a home No Limit Hold'em tournament that has been included with your tape. One of the ways that you're going to get better at this game is by playing quite a bit. So hosting games or having your friends host games is definitely going to be one of the ways that you're going to get your best practice. But there are a few things you're going to want to know before you start a tournament, and just some basic setup stuff. First of all, one thing that a lot of people who play in home poker games don't do is they don't create a cut card. And a cut card is the card that will go on the bottom of the deck. If you don't have one, after you shuffle and then you cut, very often people might see the bottom card, and you might think, oh, well, it's only one card out of 52. Well, you know, sometimes, particularly in Hold'em, if two tens were to hit on the flop and someone's seen that there's a 10 on the bottom of the deck, that's certainly going to change the play quite a bit. Now, the way you prevent anyone from seeing the bottom card is you create a cut card. So what you would do is you would take your two decks or one deck, and you'd find a couple of jokers, and you put them together, and you just take out some Scotch tape. Like a nice little home arts and crafts project here, but it just takes a second. And a few well-placed pieces of tape, and you have yourself a cut card. One more piece. Now this is like a double thick card. You're not going to confuse it for a real card. And now after you're done shuffling, excuse me here, you're going to cut the cards onto the cut card, and you'll see that the bottom card will not get exposed. And again, now you can actually do this, and no one's going to know what's on the bottom of the deck. So this is an important tool for a home poker game. Also, you're going to want to have two decks. I would suggest that you invest and you can get yourself a nice pair of plastic cards. They last longer, they don't mark as easily. So these are the cards you're going to want to get. You're also going to want to buy some chips. But again, poker goes much more smoothly, and it's much easier to play if you actually have chips as opposed to using cash or matchsticks or whatever else you might want to use. The way I have the home poker tournament structure set up is each person in the tournament, no matter how many players you have, whether you have 5 players or 10 players or 40 players, each player is going to start off with 1,000 in chips. And also, I made it very simple. You're going to get 8 of each chip. So the green chips are 25s, and the black chips are 100s. So you would do 8 black chips and 8 green chips. And you'll see that's 4, 8, 9, 10. Each person starts with a stack of 16 chips, and that's 1,000. And here for our theoretical 10-player tournament, you would create 10 stacks, just like so. And now the last bit of business, and that is you need to decide how much time you have to play your tournament, and I've made it very easy. If you look at the tournament structure sheet here, I have broken it down by number of players along the top and number of hours that you're willing to invest in playing in this tournament. In the example I give here, if you have 20 players coming over to play in your tournament, you'd create 20 stacks just like these, and then you decide how much time you have. Well, in this example, let's say you have 2 hours to play your tournament, and you would go down to the 2-hour line and then over to the 20-player column, and you see 12 minutes. Now, what does 12 minutes mean? That is how much time you're going to play at each level. Down here in the middle section, you have level 1 through level 14, and you'll notice that the blinds escalate with each level, and the blinds are what drive the action. So if I'm the dealer, the person to my left and the person to his left is going to put in during level 1, and every tournament will start at level 1, $25 and $25. And that is going to determine how fast the action goes. Of course, if the blinds go up, it's like raising the ante in 7-card stud. It's going to force the action. If the blinds were 200 and 400, for example, which is level 7, and you will get there eventually during a tournament, you can see how that drives the action, because look at what a large percentage of the stack has been committed to the blinds. And what tends to happen is as players become eliminated from the tournament, the average stack of the players that are left grows, the blinds grow, and we keep eliminating players and we end up with 1 player. So again, using our example, you could take a kitchen timer or a watch, and you just set it to 12 minutes, and you invite your 10 friends over to start playing, and again, we would start at 25 and 25. And when this thing goes off, 12 minutes later, wow, that's loud, excuse me, we would go to the next level, level 2, and now the blinds would be 25 and 50, and then so on and so on. You'll also notice here that at level 7, I have a notation that you can remove the green chips because you no longer need the green chips for the blinds. And the way you would do that is you would take everyone's equal hundreds off. Let's just remove these. So we have these 2 theoretical players, and you would bring out some extra black chips out of your chip case or whatever, and we would buy these hundreds off of each player and remove the green chips. And now you'll see that this player has 2 odd green chips, and this player has 3 odd green chips, and you'd take a deck, you'd shuffle it, and I've already shuffled this deck, and you would give 3 cards to the player with 3 chips and 2 cards to the player with 2 chips, and the one with the highest card would win all the chips. And this is 5 chips. We would round down, and we would give this player another 100, and we would take the greens off the table. Now, of course, if you're playing in a 1-table tournament, the greens are going to work out even. Maybe you have 3 or 4 players, but you do the same procedure. Some players are going to have 1 green chip, a couple might have 2, maybe there'll be a player with 3. Everyone has an equal chance to win the chips based on how many green chips they're contributing to the pot during that race-off. Anyway, so you're going to start losing players. These blinds are going to escalate, and if you just use this simple structure at the top, you should be able to accommodate the number of players with the amount of time, and you should all have a fun evening. One of the big differences between casino poker and home poker is that in a casino you're going to have a professional dealer, like Linda here, dealing to you, which is why you would use a dealer button to indicate who acts last each round. But in home games, you're not going to have a professional dealer, and so there is a procedure whereby you can keep the game moving and know who is shuffling and who is cutting and who is dealing, because you do need all 3 of those things done each hand. So if the hand were to end, let's say Vinny wins the hand, and I push in the pot and I was dealing, I would bring in the cards, but before I start shuffling, I would take the different colored deck, always buy 1 blue deck and 1 red deck, or a green deck and a brown deck, and these cards were shuffled by Steve, and I would come over here and I would cut for Suki, and she could start dealing while I shuffle. So why don't you deal, Suki? Yep. So she is the dealer, and she's now dealing to the left. And let's have blinds there. And you'll notice that I'm shuffling. You can deal me in, Suki.
Oh, am I good?
Yep. You're dealing yourself in. Yep. This is a home game.
The button at the home game?
Yeah. The dealer is the button.
Oh, okay. Dealer is the button. I'll give him a button. Oh, I'm first to ask.
So she has just dealt, and she's the dealer. And in a home game, the dealer is indicated by who's holding the deck, or you usually put down the deck to be playing your cards. And you'll notice I have now completed my shuffle, and I am here. So let's just say the hand is done, and we all fold our hand. I'm just going to show you how this procedure works, and this is how you keep the game moving. You notice the deck for the next hand is now ready. Suki's going to bring in her cards, but before she starts shuffling, she's going to cut the cards for Janine, who would deal the next hand. And the whole process starts over. Suki would shuffle, and when she's done shuffling, she would place the deck to her left. And that's how you keep the game moving, and that's how you keep the decks separated. And 3 different people are involved in the process. One person shuffles, another person cuts, and a third person deals. And that's how you do it in a home game. Well, I'd like to start with the basic rules of No Limit Hold'em and how you play. There are some differences between home Hold'em and casino Hold'em. You'll notice in a casino you would have a puck, which would indicate who is the dealer, because we're going to have one dealer here, and to indicate who acts last each hand. This would move around from hand to hand around the table. When you're playing at home, the player who actually is dealing or holds the deck is certainly a good enough indication of who acts last. So if I were dealing, we would start with the blinds with Suki and Janine. So Suki would put in 25. Janine would put in 50. Now I'm going to deal the cards face up because we're just going to go over the basic action right here. We're not really sort of playing poker at this point. So now the first 2 cards are dealt to each player, and they are dealt face down. But in this case, I'm going to deal them face up so that we can follow the action a little better here while we learn the rules. Okay, now, the action starts to the left of the blinds. Suki and Janine have put their money in without looking at their cards, and these act as antes. If you've played 7 stud before but haven't played Hold'em, instead of antes, we have blinds. So only 2 people are putting money in the pot without looking at their hands. In 7-card stud, everyone at the table would be putting in a small amount to start the action. So the action would start to the left of the big blind, and a 9-5 would tend to fold. As would a Queen 10, although that may look like a decent hand. It's not very good. And the Jack 10 would probably fold. And the Queen 4, typically the Queen Jack would probably enter the pot now for a raise. So why don't you put in 150, Grace? So it's 25 and 50, and a nice typical raise would be 3 to 4 times the big blind. A hand like Queen Jack, you might want to put in 150. You can fold. And why don't you call, just to see how the game works. That's not a very good hand, and nor is the 8 high. Okay, so we had our pre-flop action. This money all goes into the pot, and we have 2 players left. So let's muck these cards. Of course, these would always be face down. And now we would have a flop. Now, first of all, before we flop the 3 community cards, we have what's called a burn card. And this has always just been traditional in poker. Sometimes either by accident or maybe 20 or 30 years ago, not by accident, the top card might become marked. So, maybe there's a little crease or ridge. If you're playing with paper cards, you certainly can get marks over the course of the night. So you burn off the top card so no one could ever know what's coming, because that top card is not going to be used. and now you would turn over 3 community cards. And that's called the flop. So now we have turned up the flop, and the action, again, would start here and move around. So since Steve is the dealer, he's always going to act last. So it would be on Grace. And she's actually flopped a pretty good hand here. She is top pair with a queen. And she would probably make a bet here. 300 looks good. And just to keep the action going, not that I would recommend calling with an ace and a 10 here, but he does have a chance. If an 8 comes, you would see that he would make a straight here. And also, if an ace came, he would make aces. So he actually has 2 different ways to win. So why don't you call? Okay, so that's a betting round on the flop. Now also, Grace, if she wanted to, she could have put all her chips in. In no limit poker, you can bet all your chips at any time. But she bet 300. And it was called by Steve. So we have another burn, and now this is 4th Street, and look at that, here's the 8. This is 4th Street. It's also called the turn card. So sometimes I'm going to refer to this street as the turn. Sometimes I may refer to it as 4th Street. 4th Street for obvious reasons. Again, now, very often this 8 might scare Grace a little bit, just because she now knows that if Steve has a 10, which would be a very likely card for Steve to have with a flop like this, that he would have a straight, and she might check. Steve, I would say you should probably bet all your chips at this point. Okay, and Grace, maybe suspecting a bluff, might want to call. And one thing you'll notice here, Grace has more chips than Steve, okay? Now, just because she has more chips, I know in the movies you've seen that when someone has more chips, Steve now has to go and mortgage his house, or maybe he has to fold because the person he was betting against had more chips than him. That's not how it works. You are always allowed to bet up to how much you have in front of you, but you can only win as much as you have in front of you. So he puts in 425, Grace puts in 425. This is the black chips are 100 and the green chips are quarters. So this is 300, 425, so she calls, and even if she loses this hand, which it looks like she probably will, she's going to have those chips left over. Steve can only win what he has in front of him. Okay, even though Steve has hit his best card, which is the straight to give himself a jack-high straight, the hand is not over. Grace does have some outs. She could hit one of the last remaining 3 10s left in the deck, and if a 10 were to hit, and I'm going to borrow Steve's 10, if you see her hand here, she would make a queen-high straight, a queen, jack, 10, 9, 8, and she would win the pot. So she does have 3 outs. An out is a card in the deck that would give you the best hand. So let's take a look at the last card. And it is no help to Grace. So Steve is going to win the hand. Now, this last card is referred to by 2 different names. It's 5th Street, or it's also called the River. And it would be referred to by either name, the River or 5th Street, and it all means the same thing. It's the last card, or when you refer to the River, it could be the last betting round. Now, they're all in, so there's no more betting, and Steve would win the pot. And that's No Limit Hold'em. We're down to 4 here in our hypothetical home tournament, and we're going to be able to look at another hand just so we can go back over the standard play of No Limit Hold'em, but also, particularly as you start to get down in a tournament, a couple of interesting rules can come up, and I just want to demonstrate how those work. Also, you'll see here that the blinds have gone up, and if you look at your home tournament structure sheet, you will see that there are levels and that the blinds elevate. Now, the blinds going up will drive the action and will force people to commit more chips to the pot. So here we would have Tony start with 100 and Sylvia start with 200. You'll notice Sylvia only has 100 left, so she's pretty much committed to playing this hand, and if she doesn't win this pot, she will be out of the tournament. So again, we're going to deal face up. And the action would be on you, sir. So with two jacks, certainly you would probably come in for a raise, let's say 800. It's a very nice hand. We're down to 4-handed. Okay, now we come to Janine, and it's 800 to her. She has a very strong hand, ace-king.
which really is only in big trouble against aces or kings, and she has an ace and a king in her hand. So it's hard for her to run into either of those two hands. So she would normally, particularly in a four-handed situation, she would make a nice big raise. So why don't you put 20 of those black chips in there? So she's going from 800 to 2,000 here. Okay. Yep. So you put those in. We'll put those in the pot. And it comes to Tony, who has a junk hand 9-3, and he folds. And now comes to Sylvia. Now she's pretty sure that she's beat here, but for $100 she might as well throw it in. And it's 1,200 to Dan, and he has a very good hand. So most people in this situation would put their chips all in. This is one of the exciting aspects of No Limit Hold'em. Anytime you want that, that you think you have the best hand, you can just put those chips in the pot. Certainly with a hand like Ace King, Janine's not going to fold at this point. Let's see how much the raise is to her. She put in 2,000. Okay, so, and this is the standard procedure. He's calling her 2,000, and you would bring that into the pot. And here is his raise. So again, the greens are 25 chips, and so we have 1, 2, 3, 6, 75 more to Janine. So she calls. Okay, now, now we need to do a little bit of housekeeping. Sylvia only has 300 in chips, so she can only win up to 300 from each of her opponents. Now Tony's in for 100, so that goes into the main pot, and then 300 from both Dan and Janine joins the 300 from Sylvia, and we now have a $1,000 main pot. Sylvia can only win these chips. She can't win any of the side pot. So she's all in for 300, $1,000 main pot, and Dan and Janine are in the side pot. So we have a burn, and again we have the 3-card community flop. We'll notice at this point Sylvia's made a pair of 6s. Dan still has the best hand with 2 jacks, and Janine needs to hit an ace or a king. Those are her outs. There are 6 of those left in the deck, so you would say that she has 6 outs. Sylvia has 5 outs. She needs a 6 or a 7. There are only 2 6s left in the deck, and there are 3 7s. And Dan has the best hand. Okay, so we will burn now, and we will turn 4th Street, or the turn card, and you can see that Janine has hit her ace, so she has aces with the king. She also has a flush draw, which would beat Dan's flush. So actually the only way that Dan can win is if a jack comes up, the jack of clubs or the jack of diamonds, so he has 2 cards to win with. Sylvia now only has 4 cards to win with. The 7 of spades would give Janine a flush, so she's down to 4 cards, and so this was a very good card for Janine. And let's take a look at the river, or the 5th card, and it is no help to anybody. So Janine would win the pot. She has 2 aces with a king kicker. Again, let's look at this as she makes her best 5-card hand, and we will push up the cards that she would end up using. She has 2 aces. She has a king kicker, a 10 kicker, and an 8 kicker. The 6 and the deuce she would not play. That's Janine's hand. Sylvia's hand is 2 6s with an ace, a 10, and an 8. Notice again that she is only playing 1 card from her hand, the 6. She's not playing her 7. And Dan is playing 2 cards from his hand. He has 2 jacks, and he has an ace, a 10, and an 8 kicker. So again, Janine would win with 1 pair, aces with a king kicker. Now, these 2 players would be eliminated from the tournament, and we would be down to Janine and Tony. But you might ask, well, who finished 4th and who finished 3rd? And this is a standard rule in tournament poker. Certainly would be a standard rule in a casino, and certainly would be appropriate to have as a rule in a home game, and that is the player who started the hand with more money, if 2 players go broke, would finish in the higher spot. So in this case, Dan would finish 3rd,
and Sylvia would finish 4th because she had less chips at the start of the hand. Very often in a 10-player tournament or 20-player tournament, 3rd place might win a prize. 4th place might win a prize, but certainly 3rd place would be a bigger prize. So you need to know how you break ties in these situations, and that is the standard procedure for breaking ties. Okay, well, we're now going to go over some pre-flop strategy, and I'm going to focus a lot of this instructional tape on pre-flop strategy. This is the point of the hand where I feel like I can help you the most and get your game up to speed the fastest. The later streets, after the flop and on 4th Street and 5th Street, it gets very complicated. It's going to take a lot of experience. You're going to have to start playing poker to really start to play those streets well. But I feel like I can get you betting pre-flop very well, very quickly, and very easily. So what I want you to do is I want you to take out your piece of paper that looks something like this that says pre-flop strategy at the top. And I'm going to show you how to use this sheet to play pretty close to expert pre-flop strategy. Now you'll notice here at the lower portion of the sheet there's early position, there's middle position, late position, and there's in the blind. So I'm going to explain to you where those 4 positions are at the table. Now first of all, in the blinds obviously are the 2 blinds. So we have the $50 and the $100 blind here for this demonstration hand. These 2 players are in the blinds. We have Tony and we have Barbara Joe, and they have the blinds. So they would be considered in the blinds. Now the early position players would be these first 3 right here. Okay, middle position would be these 2 players here, and the 2 players in late position would be here and here. Now why is position important? Well, before the flop, the reason it is important is because the more players that have not entered the pot behind you, the more likely it is that one of those players are going to have a very strong hand. So if you pick a mediocre hand, a hand that might be good, it might not be good, if you decide to play it in early position, there's a much better chance that you're going to get raised later on in that pre-flop betting round and it's just sheer numbers. If Vinny were to decide to play a mediocre hand here, I mean, he wouldn't play a 6-5, but let's just say he had like a queen and a jack, there are literally 8 people that could have aces or kings or ace-king or ace-queen. And actually, it's quite likely that one of the 8 people is going to have a pretty strong hand and certainly have queen-jack beat. So it's very easy to fold. If everybody folds all the way to Janine, and she has the same kind of queen-jack suited or king-queen, those types of hands that can be very marginal up front, now all of a sudden she only has to beat the 2 blinds. So the chances that she's beaten have gone way down. So it's always good to act later on in a betting round, and that will definitely affect the pre-flop strategy. So let's take a look at the hands and how I think they ought to be played, and I'm going to show you how to use this sheet. So first of all, let's look at Vinny's hand. He's in early position and he has a 6-5, and if you look at this sheet, 6-5 does not appear on the sheet. So if it doesn't appear on the sheet, we're not going to play it, and he's going to fold. Now we come to Sylvia, and she has an ace and a king, and this is called ace-king offsuit. And so that would be in B. You'll notice the ace-king with an S next to it is in section A. That would be ace-king suited, and that would be if, for instance, this king of spades were in her hand. That is an ace-king suited. Her 2 cards are of the same suit, and this is an ace-king offsuit. Not quite as strong as an ace-king suited, but a very strong hand nonetheless. So I would suggest that she come into the pot for a raise. And I think that when you open a pot, this is also called an opening raise. That is, she's the first to enter the pot, and she's entering the pot for a raise. So if you look down here, she's in early position. She has an A, B, or C group hand. She is a group B, and I would suggest that she opens the pot. And I think she should open the pot for 400, four times the big blind. So Sylvia has raised 400, and now we come to Grace. Grace has a 6-4 offsuit, and this hand is not on the chart, so she would fold. And now we come to Dan with a pair of 3s. Now, a pair of 3s is on the chart. It is a group E hand. Now, the opening column here is if no one has entered the pot to you yet. And now you'll see underneath here, after a player has opened, you should re-raise with an A or B hand, otherwise you should fold. this is an aggressive style of play, but basically, before the flop, I want you to have a hand that you can raise with. I don't want you calling raises. You need to be the aggressor. I want you to be feared at the table. And when other people open the pot and you just call, you're not striking fear into their hearts. So I would suggest that you throw this 2-3s away. Yes, it may be the best hand, and in this case, it is a slightly better hand than ace-king, but it's very hard to win a pot with 2-3s unless a 3 comes up on the flop, and I would suggest that you throw this hand away. And now we come to Steve and his 9-10 of diamonds. Now this is a suited hand, but again, it's not on the chart. These cards are a little too low. I would throw them away. And now this is another trap hand. Suki has an ace-9, and I see a lot of beginning players fall in love with their ace. And when you see an ace, it's like, oh boy, I have an ace. And they would very often call the 400 here. But if you look at this hand, if you look at the kind of hands from early position that Sylvia would raise the pot with, a lot of them will also contain an ace. And one of the interesting things about Hold'em is that you might think, well, ace-king against ace-9, those are pretty close. Neither hand is a pair. They both have an ace. But actually, Sylvia's hand is over a 3-to-1 favorite, over 75% to beat this hand. It is very bad to be in what is called a dominated position. When you are dominated, that means you share one card, but your opponent has a higher side card or kicker card. And actually, this is a pretty easy fold for an expert player. A lot of beginners get in trouble with this ace-9. This is an easy laydown. I would suggest that she fold her hand. Okay, we now come up to Janine, and she has an 8-6 offsuit, which is off the chart, so she would fold. And now we come to Tony with the Jack-4, a very weak hand, a very simple fold. He throws his hand away. Okay, and now we come to Barbara Joe, and she is in the big blind, the $100 blind with King-Jack. And again, this is a trap hand for a lot of amateurs, but again, let's refer to the chart. If we go down to the section that says in the blinds, it says that versus an early open, and remember, Sylvia did open an early position, it says that you should re-raise with an A group hand, that would only be aces, kings, or ace-king suited, and you should call with B or C, and her hand actually is not on the chart. It's King-Jack. It's real close. It's almost a Category E hand, but this is a pretty easy fold. Sylvia has opened in early position. Most of the hands she's going to open with certainly have that hand beat. Almost every hand will have King-Jack beat, but a lot of them have her hand dominated, and in fact she does have her hand dominated. She has an ace and a king against a king and a jack. Again, you see they share the king, but her ace would beat the jack, and Sylvia is in fact a 3-to-1 favorite to win this pot. And again, a good expert, I think, would find this an easy fold, but most beginners are going to get trapped and call with this King-Jack because it has 2 picture cards. But again, if you look at my chart and you use it properly, you'd be throwing this hand away and you'd be avoiding this trap. Let's go on to the next hand. Okay, let's look at another hand here, and let's go a little more deeply into pre-flop strategy. Again, the button has now moved, and it is up to Sylvia to act first in early position. She has a 9 and a 6 offsuit, again an easy fold. Again, one of those trap aces that a lot of beginners would play, but from early position this is a very easy fold. Grace folds. And now we come to Dan, and he has 2 jacks, and again we look at the sheet. 2 jacks is a Group B hand. And if we look at what you should do with a Group B hand from early position, when no one has entered the pot, it is, he should open for a raise. So again, 4 times the big blind, he opens for 400. Now we come up to an interesting hand, and here's Steve with 2 8s. And someone has now opened to his right. He has 5 people behind him, and he knows that Dan has opened from an early position and probably has a very strong hand. We look at the sheet. It is a Group C hand, and it says here after a player has opened, you re-raise with a Group A or Group B hand, but we fold all other hands. Again, I really want you developing a style where when you enter a pot before the flop, you enter raising. If your hand isn't good enough to re-raise, I don't want you calling, and I basically want you throwing your hand away. So unless he has a particular read or a real reason to think that Dan doesn't have a good hand, he should throw this hand away. And again, he is avoiding a trap that I think a lot of beginning players would fall into by playing these 2 8s. So again, he looks, it's Group C, and it's a fold. And now we come up to Suki, and she has a very strong hand. It's an ace-king suited. It is a group A hand. And again, we look at the sheet. It says after a player is opened, we re-raise with group A or group B hands. And given her chips, I think she ought to just move in.
Okay.
So she's going to raise all her chips, all in. She has a nice, this is a very nice re-raising hand. Unless Dan's hand is very strong, she's probably going to win the pot. We come up to Janine. She has a Jack-7, which is not in any of the groups. She throws her hand away. Now we come up to Tony's hand, which is King-Queen suited. And again, that's a Group D hand. It's an awfully pretty looking hand. A lot of people would play this hand, but it is a very, very easy fold after it's gone a raise and a re-raise to you. There is almost no chance that this hand isn't dominated. If one of these two players has kings or aces, your hand has almost no chance to win. If one of these players has queens, it's not a very good hand. And if one of these players has ace-king, your hand is a 3-to-1 underdog. This is a very, very easy fold that some players might get trapped in with. So Tony folds. And to Barbara Joe, she throws away her 9 and 3. And Vinny throws away his 7 and 5 offsuit. And now we come around to Dan, and now we're going to go one more level here on the pre-flop strategy sheet. And now we look here from early position. After you've opened and you've been raised, you can either call a re-raise or re-raise. And with a group B hand, which 2 jacks is, I would suggest a call after you've been raised. So Dan would put in the rest of his chips. And this would be a classic no-limit hold'em race. I think both players played the hand correctly, and it's about a 50-50 hand. Actually, Dan has a slightly better chance of winning the pot. Let's go on to another hand. I wanted to continue our pre-flop strategy discussion, but I want to show you how you adjust for short-handed play. If you're playing home tournaments, you're going to start with 10 people at a table. Maybe even you start with 2 or 3 tables, but eventually you're going to get down to short-handed play toward the end of the tournament. And this part of the tournament is very critical. You need to start to become more aggressive, and you need to expand your starting requirements. And what that means is you're going to start a lot more hands. And I'm going to explain to you how to use this sheet while you're playing at shorter and shorter tables. First of all, Tony here is the first to act. So I guess one way you could look at it is he's in early position at a 4-handed table. But as far as my chart is concerned, I want you to consider him to be in late position. And the way you figure that out is what you need to do is you need to look at how many people are to act behind you when it's your turn to act. So there are only 3 people here who have to act after Tony acts. And that is the same as though he were in the 8th seat at a 10-handed table. He would just have the, in the 7th seat. He would have the 7th seat, and then there'd be the 8th seat, and then the 2 blinds at a 10-handed table. So it's the same thing as though he were. So what you need to do is you have to imagine the other 6 people are at the table, and they've all folded. And now it comes to Tony, and it's his turn to act. Even though he's first to act here in this 4-handed situation, he is in late position. So when you get down to 4-handed, the only thing you refer to are the late position columns here in the pre-flop strategy sheet. So if you look at ace-10, you would find that he is in late position, even though he's first to act here in this 4-handed game, and he is ace-10 offsuit. And we look down, and it is a category E hand. You look down in late position, you would open with a category E hand, so he would open for $400. And we come to Janine's hand. She has Jack-8. It's not on the chart here. She would fold. And now John has 2 4s. And 2 4s is also a category E hand. And if we look at your play in the blinds against the late opener, it says that you can call against the late opener with a category E hand. So Jim would put in his 350, 350 more, call the 400 total. And Steve does not have much of a hand here with 7-6, and he throws his hand away. And we would take a flop. So again, this is just a simple hand. Nothing much has happened here, but you see that people are expanding their opening requirements. Of course, if Tony had been an early position opener, John would not have called with the 2-4s. But since he also realizes that Tony is a late position opener, even though he's first acted a 4-handed table, he also called with the 2-4s. So everyone here is adjusting their play. Here are two about 50-50 hands, and of course the flop will make a big difference as to who has the best hand here. But this is proper play before the flop, 4-handed. Okay, we're going to look at one more hand here at the short-handed play for pre-flop strategy. And again, we have the 50 and 100 blinds. The button is now moved over to John. And Janine has the Queen-8 offsuit, which even though we're playing short-handed, I wouldn't suggest that she plays. So she folds. And now we come over to John's hand. He's on the button. He has a very strong hand. He has 2 queens. And if we look at 2 queens on our chart for late position, obviously we're going to open the pot for a raise. But if we continue to look down, we're going to see the re-raise section there. And I would suggest that even if John were to be re-raised after he opened the pot with the 2 queens, I would suggest that he then raise again, particularly from late position. Remember that someone is going to be more likely to re-raise you when you open from late position because they know that you'll open more hands from that position. Now, one argument might be, or it might occur to someone at home, that, well, if we're going to raise and then we're willing to re-raise, well, maybe John should just move all his chips into the middle of the pot. And actually, John, why don't you do that, just to give people an idea? And this might be a typical way that a beginning player might play his 2 queens. But what John would be doing effectively with his 2 queens by doing this is what David Skolansky, the noted gambling author, has mentioned. He would be turning his 2 queens into a 7-deuce offsuit. And a 7-deuce offsuit is one of the worst hands you can have. And you might ask, well, why is he turning his 2 queens into a 7-deuce offsuit? Well, he's putting so much money in the pot here, it's about 5,000, and it's only a 50 and 100, that the only hand that is going to call him is 2 aces or 2 kings. So he might as well have 7-deuce offsuit, because if he moved all his chips into the middle with a 7-deuce offsuit, again, only aces or kings are going to call him, so he's very likely to win this $150. But if one of these 2 players has aces or kings, they're going to call, and they're probably going to win all his chips. It's the exact same thing. He's turning a wonderful hand like 2 queens, moving all his chips into the middle of the pot, and the only way that he is going to play a big pot is when he's beat. And that is what you do not want to do when you're playing poker. It is very important to allow your opponents to make a bad mistake. And what I would suggest is, just like he would do with an ace-10 offsuit or a pair of 3s, I would suggest that he open the pot for 400. He's allowing his opponents to make a mistake, but he's also raising the pot. He's not giving them a cheap flop to look at to beat his queens, but he is also disguising the true strength of his hand. Next, we would come to Steve, who is an ace-deuce offsuit, and again, this could be a trouble hand for some players, but I would suggest that you fold an ace and a rag in the small blind to an open. And now we come to Tony, and he has 2 9s. And if we look down at 2 9s, we would find that a group C hand. And if we look at in the blind play against the late opener, I would suggest that you re-raise a late opener with 2 9s. And typically you want to raise about a pot-sized bet. So after Tony puts the 300 in to call the bet, there's about 850 in the pot. So I would actually suggest, with a pair of 9s against a late opener like this, that he call the 3 more and raise about 800 or 900 more. So why don't you do that, Tony? Okay, so there's the call, and now he's raising 900, which is about a pot-size raise. It's important that when you have a good hand, and 2 9s in the big blind against the button open is definitely a good hand, that you don't like just raise 400 or 500. You definitely, again, he wants to allow John to make a mistake. If John has 2 8s here, you know, or even a hand like ace-9 suited, which is the kind of hand that John might have raised with on the button, you want to allow him to make a mistake, but you also want to punish him and force him to call a reasonably sized bet before the flop. Now, unfortunately for Tony, he has run into a very big hand, so it would come back to John, and he would call the 900, and then move the rest of his chips in the pot. And why don't you move in? And now you see how things have changed. I feel like if he had put the entire 5,000 in right away, Tony would have thrown away his 2 nines. But now all of a sudden we've allowed Tony to put 1,300, committed 1,300 to the pot, and now it comes back to Tony, and he only has about 2,500 more to call, and now this is a tremendously difficult decision for Tony. If John has ace-king, Tony's making a really bad fold. But if John has 2 queens, he's making a really bad call. And those are the kinds of decisions that you want to put your opponent to. It's the tough decisions. Whenever you can make your opponent have to make a tough decision, that is good in poker. And again, I really wouldn't know whether he should call with the 2 nines. I'd have to be playing the hand, and of course Tony would have to make that decision on his own. This is about a 50-50 decision. He's getting a little over 2 to 1 to call. He only has to win the pot about a third of the time to make it a proper call. Now, in this particular situation, he's only going to win the pot about 18% of the time. So actually, this is a pretty big fold. If he knew he was up against queens, the problem is he could be up against ace-queen. He could be up against ace-king. There might even be a small chance he could be up against 2 eights if John's a very aggressive player. So you have all these things to think about, and all of a sudden, he's really being put to the test with this type of decision. Again, if John had moved all his chips in before the flop, I don't think he would have been put to the test. He would have just thrown his 2 nines away, we would have gone on to the next hand, and John would have won 150. So not only has John gotten Tony to commit 1,300 into the pot, but now Tony has a terribly difficult decision for the rest of his chips, and that's exactly what you want to do before the flop and no limit hold'em. What I want to do before we really get into betting strategy and concepts on those betting rounds is I want to look at the odds chart, which I've also included in your tape package, and I want you to pull it out. It should look something like this. It's an odds chart, and you're going to see outs over here and then matchups and odds. And if you look at this, you're going to see the number of outs on the left is how many cards are in the deck that would give you the best hand if you don't have the best hand right now. And that's a very important concept in Hold'em, and you're going to need to figure out how to add up your outs to be able to calculate these odds. Now, I'm giving you some of the basic matchups, and I'll explain to you how a certain number of outs will come up in a natural Hold'em hand. So I'm going to give you an example of the type of matchup between the better hand and the worse hand that would lead to you only having 2 outs or 8 outs or 21 outs. So let's look at the 2-out example. And that would be if you look at this particular situation, the flop has come a king, a 10, and a 4. You started with the best hand, 2 eights, but your opponent has drawn out. He has ace-king. And right now, the only way for you to win, and let's count your outs, they are 2, and the reason is there is no card that can come up on the deck that can give you the best hand except for one of the 2 red 8s. There are only 2 8s left in the deck. Any other card, a deuce, a queen, they're not going to help your hand. So you have exactly 2 outs. Your chances at this stage of the hand, with 2 cards to come, are approximately 9%. And then if the ace-king were to bet and you were to call and now the next card were to come up and it's not an 8, you would now be down to 5%. So that's what these 2 columns mean. So the on-the-flop percentage is the percentage that you will win the hand needing 2 outs when there are 2 cards to come. And then, of course, if you miss, your odds are going to go down. You'll notice that the 4th street or 4th card column always goes down because we're assuming that you've now missed on the 4th card, and now you see that your odds have gone down to 5%. It's going to be very important to understand these numbers. Now, I did have to go and calculate these exact numbers for you to create this sheet. I couldn't give you all the odds down to the exact percentage. It's not important. If you have a good understanding and a good feel for the approximate odds of each of these matchups, you're going to be able to make intelligent decisions about how to play your hand. So that was the first situation. Let's look at the next situation. And Hold'em is a game of matchups, and you'll see what I mean later. So here's another situation. Here's situation number 2. This comes up all the time. During the pre-flop strategy, you may remember that I mentioned 2 hands where one hand has the other dominated. And here is one of those situations. Let's close the flop. Here's 2 hands. Maybe this player opened in a middle position and this player called, where I wouldn't suggest that you call with a queen jack. And one of the real problems with this hand is that the queen jack before the flop is dominated by the ace queen, and particularly in no limit hold'em that can be very dangerous, because now when the flop comes a queen, very simple flop, nothing much has happened. Well, if you're sitting here with queen jack, you're pretty happy. You just flop top pair, you've got a pretty good kicker. But lo and behold, your opponent has the dominating ace queen. And again, you're also thinking to yourself, well, even if your opponent has an ace queen, the hands are pretty close. You both have a pair of queens. The problem is that in hold'em, and this is very particular to hold'em, is that if you have the second best hand that is nearly as good as your opponent's hand, you're in big trouble. And if you look at these odds, the queen jack here only has a 13% chance of winning this pot. I mean, that's over 8 to 1. Sorry, that is about 8 to 1. And then if you miss on the next card, you're down to 7%. These are terrible odds, and the problem is that it looks like you have a good hand. So if you're in this situation, you might lose a very large percentage of your stack, if not your entire stack, thinking you have a good hand, when actually you have a 13% chance on the flop and only a 7% chance on 4th Street to win the hand. So these are the kinds of matchups that, by using the pre-flop strategy, that you're going to avoid. Let's move on to the next matchup. The next matchup comes up quite a bit. And this is one of the problems with playing ace-rag. And ace-rag is defined as having an ace in your hand but having a low card. Not that Jack-10 is a whole lot better than ace-5, but at very least, if you do have a Jack-10, if you hit either your 10 or your Jack, you have a reasonably high pair. One of the problems with ace-rag is that if you hit your lower card, thereby giving yourself an ace kicker, you only have a pair of 5s. But if you hit your ace, you only have a 5 kicker, and an ace is the most likely card for your opponent to play. So again, you can find yourself in that dominated position. If you're playing against an ace-king or an ace-queen and the board comes an ace, now all of a sudden the only way you can win is by hitting your 5, one of your 3 outs. And we don't like to be just drawing to 3 outs, obviously. So here's a typical situation where you flopped your 5, but you're up against someone who was playing some decent middle cards here, and your opponent has flopped a higher pair. And again, let's look at the outs. You have 5 ways to win. There are 2 5s in the deck. There are the two black 5s, the 5 of spades and the 5 of clubs, and there are 3 aces in the deck, the 2 red aces and the ace of spades. That's a total of 5, and this gives you about a 20% chance of winning the pot. And if you were to miss on the next card, again, now we still can only win with a 5 or an ace. Your chances of winning the pot go down to 11%. So again, this is a situation that is to be avoided. This is one of the real strengths of playing a hand, and let me sneak a card over here, of ace-king. When you play ace-king, the only pair you can hit is a very high pair. If the board's going to come a king or an ace, you are going to have the highest pair on board, and you're going to have the highest possible kicker to go with it. This is why we love hands like ace-king. We don't really like hands like ace-5. And here is just a standard flush draw. Standard flush draw is a little bit better than a straight draw. And the reason is there are 9 different ways to hit a flush. You see there are 13 cards in each suit. So if we look at this flush draw here, you see we've got a player that has top pair, a pair of jacks with an 8 kicker. We have another player here with the 8-6 of hearts, 2 hearts for a flush draw. There are 2 hearts on the board. So there are a total of 4 hearts here. There's 2 on the board and 2 in your hand. And as we know, there are 13 cards in each suit. So any of the other 9 hearts in the deck would give this hand the best hand. With 9 outs, a standard flush draw, you have a 37% chance of winning the pot. On the flop, and even after you miss and you don't hit a heart on 4th Street, you still have a 21% chance of winning the pot. This is, again, a pretty simple hand in terms of calculating your outs. 2 hearts on the flop, 2 hearts in your hand, 9 remaining. Now, I've only seen this next draw a few times. In fact, many years ago, in one of the first World Series of Pokers that I played in, I actually saw Telly Savalas have this almost exact draw against another player, and sadly, he did lose the pot. But he did have one of the best draws I've ever seen, and it did lose. And this is it. And this is pretty much the maximum, the best possible draw that you can have in Hold'em. And this particular situation where you have a king, queen of diamonds and a jack, 10 of diamonds on the board, and your opponent just simply has one pair, has 21 different ways to win. And again, the way you calculate that is we see the straight flush, and we've already seen that a straight flush has 15 different ways to either make the straight, the flush, or the straight flush. But we actually now have 6 other cards that give us the win, and that's the other 3 queens, the 2 black queens and the queen of hearts, and the other 3 kings, the 2 black kings and the king of hearts to win. So you win if it comes a king, a queen, an ace, a 9, or any diamond. And actually now we become a 2-to-1 favorite. If you have a straight flush draw with 2 live overcards, you have a 67% chance of winning the pot. Even when you miss on 4th Street, you're almost 50-50 to win. With just 1 card to come here, the best hand, the pair of jacks, is still only a 52% chance favorite to win on 4th Street. Again, on the flop, this hand, what some people might think is the best hand, the jacks, actually is a 2-to-1 underdog to win this pot. And these are some of the typical matchups that you're going to see on the flop, and it's important to know these numbers. Again, you're going to be applying these numbers to the decisions you're going to make when you're playing Hold'em after the flop. Okay, well, we've looked at some pre-flop betting strategy, and we've also looked at the odds chart to give you some kind of idea of different kinds of situations that can come up. Now I'm going to talk specifically about on-the-flop betting strategy. And pretty much from here on out, I'm going to have to talk in some kind of generalities, but things are going to get a little complex. And this is really the part of the game that's going to take years to truly master, and certainly it's going to take some play, if you're a beginning player, to start really getting a feel for some of these situations. It is a matter of experience. I've been playing this game for over 20 years. I've pretty much seen just about every flop scenario. So I'm kind of comfortable playing in these situations. One of the things that I've specifically done in general with your pre-flop strategy that I want you following, at least at this stage of your poker development, is it is a somewhat tight strategy, which means you're not playing a whole lot of hands, and when you are in there, you're playing aggressively. And one of the reasons I did that is so that you're not going to find yourself in a ton of very murky flop and 4th Street situations, because at this point, it's probably going to be a little difficult for you to navigate those waters. But I want to give you a few situations and just give you some things to think about when you're trying to bet on the flop. So here is absolutely one of the classic situations, and I alluded to this during the discussion of odds, but I just want to go back over it, and I want to give you an idea of the leverage of No Limit Hold'em and what makes it such a fascinating game. And here we have a classic situation again. We have 2 9s, and we have a king and an 8 and a 4 out there. So really, you know, the only way the 2 9s are beat, of course there are some other ways. Player could have had 2 8s in the pocket or 2 4s or an 8 and a 4. There are some other ways that the 9s are beat. But in general, the 9s are the best hand unless your opponent started with a king in his hand. But let's just say that the player that has this hand opened in middle or late position, and now you called with the 2 9s, and you think he had big cards, and now one big card comes out, and now you check, and now you're faced with a bet of, let's say, $500. Well, what are you to do? You're looking over at your opponent, and you're thinking, well, he could have had ace-king. Well, he might have had ace-queen. And, of course, the problem is if he had ace-king, you have a very slim chance of winning the pot, and if he has ace-queen, you have a very good chance of winning the pot. So you might say to yourself, well, he probably either has ace-king or ace-queen, and in fact, Since we know there's a king on the board, he's probably more likely to have the ace-queen than the ace-king. And now you say, well, I'll call that 500. The problem is that your opponent has one of these two hands. And in no limit hold'em, he has tremendous betting leverage. Look at this. He's only committed $500. You're very unlikely to improve your hand. So now what happens is that once we look at the next card, and let's say it's another 4, and it's very unlikely to be a 9 to improve your hand, now we're in the same situation. So let's just say the player with ace-queen or ace-king is going to play the hand this way. He's going to bet 500 on the flop whether he has either hand. But now on 4th Street and on 5th Street on the last card, he's going to continue betting if he has ace-king, but he'll check if he has ace-queen. Well, now he has tremendous leverage. Notice now, if you're committed to calling whatever he bets because you know that he either has ace-king or ace-queen, well, when he has ace-king, he's going to beat you for all your chips. But when he has ace-queen, all he's going to do is he's going to bet that $500, hoping you'll fold when you call with your 2 9s. Now the 4 comes, you check, and he checks. And in fact, it could come an ace or a queen on the last card, giving him the best hand. But let's just say it doesn't come an ace or a queen, something like a deuce here. And again, it's just going to go check, check. So when you win with this hand, you're going to win a very small pot. And when you lose, you might lose all your chips. And this is the real problem with playing after the flop in no limit hold'em. There's this tremendous leverage that the high cards have over the pairs, and very often, I mean, and this is why high cards are so highly valued in no limit. But these are some of the ideas about betting after the flop that you need to be thinking about. It's not as simple as, well, there's a good chance I have the best hand, I can just call here because I'm getting a 2-to-1 price on my money. There's the betting that's going to come on the next rounds that you need to think about. We're going to look at one last situation. And this is a very important concept in no limit hold'em. And it's about being live with your outs. And what I mean by live with your outs means you're on a draw, and you'd like to know that if you hit one of the cards you're trying to hit, that you're going to win. And that's what being live means. If you are drawing dead, there's nothing worse than drawing dead. And when you're drawing dead, that means there's no card in the deck that can come up that will give you the best hand. There's nothing worse than drawing dead and then making your hand, because then you just lose more money. So in one of these situations, let's say your opponent bets a little $400. And you've got the 9-8, and you're thinking, well, this is a pretty good hand. I could hit a jack, or I could hit a 6, or maybe even a 9 or an 8 wins. Like if your opponent has a hand like 7-6, for instance, this hand is about 50-50 to win the pot against the 7-6. It's very close to a 50-50 hand. So it'd be a big mistake against a hand like this to throw away a hand like 8-9. But one of the problems with no limit hold'em is sometimes you're either drawing dead or in very bad shape. So let's look at some of the kinds of hands that your opponent might have betting 400 into a flop like this. Well, of course, your opponent might have a hand like 2 7s in the pocket, which gives him 7s full of 10s. And now it doesn't matter what you hit. It can come a jack, giving you a straight, but you're up against a full house. It could come a 6, again, giving you a straight, but you're up against a full house. This would be one of these situations where you're drawing dead and you get there, and that's probably going to cost you all your chips. You need to be very protective of your chips and no limit hold'em. But there are some other situations just besides the drawing dead, and that is these 2 hands. And these are very common hands, particularly this one if your opponent is raised before the flop. One of the problems with playing a hand like 8-9, if you're up against 2 jacks, well, yes, you're not drawing dead. If it comes a 6, you make a straight and you have the best hand. But the other card that you might hit might be one of the other jacks would come. If it comes a jack here, you'll see, yes, you make your straight, but your opponent has now made jacks full. So it's doubly bad. You notice that 2 of the jacks that you were hoping to hit to make a straight are in your opponent's hands, but it's even worse if one of those other 2 jacks hits, because now, again, you're going to lose all your chips. So it is very dangerous to be drawing at straights and or flushes when there's a pair on the board and your opponent is betting. I would really caution against it. It is not usually a winning play. Even when you're lucky enough to be drawing live, and here you're up against 2 queens, you have you have about a 32% chance at best of winning this pot. Even if you hit a jack, the board is already paired, so you're up against 2 pair, and it's not that he only can hit a queen to beat you. Of course, a queen, he'll make queens full of 10s, but also, if the next card comes a 10, he would have 10s full of queens. So even if you're lucky enough to hit one of your outs against the pair of queens, your opponent has about a 10% chance of outdrawing you and winning the pot anyway. So again, be very cautious with draws when the board is paired. You want your draws to be live. Okay, now we move on to 4th Street, or the 4th card, and I'm going to have a few examples for you here. And again, the number of possibilities that can come up in a no-limit hold'em game by the time you're up to the 4th card are basically infinite. I can't possibly prepare you for all of them. It's going to be an issue for you to develop the comfort level, and that's only going to come with experience and play. But again, I can give you some of the key betting concepts on 4th Street and what you're trying to accomplish on that street. Now, let's look at this typical situation. These are 2 players. One of them has flopped top pair with an ace. The other player flopped a flush draw, ace-high flush draw, and there was a $400 bet and a call on the flop, let's say, for instance. And now 4th Street comes, and it comes no change. And this is a really important time in a hold'em hand. You have to remember, if you remember when we were looking at the odds chart, this hand has about a 37% chance of winning against this hand, and also this player may be thinking that his ace is good, and if his ace was good, he would have about a 45% chance of winning. It turns out that if he were to hit the ace for aces, he'd be up against aces and queens. So the ace is not a live out, and of course you want your outs to be live, but he still has the ace-high flush draw. So there are a lot of ways for this hand to win the pot, and there's a lot of money in there. Right now, there is $1,400 in the pot. So, and the good thing about no limit hold'em is that you can protect a hand like this. So let's just say after the 4th card hits, this player checks. It is very important with a hand like this that you make the draws pay. That's a key concept on 4th Street. You need to force this hand to make an uncomfortable decision, and you need to be thinking about the kinds of hands that you're likely against. So once this player has bet on the flop and you've called and now he checks, you can start thinking, well, he probably has a flush draw. So you need to bet an amount of money that makes it a bad call for the flush draw to try and make his hand. And usually it's about a pot size bet. So there's about $1,400 in the pot. If you bet $1,400 here, there's your $1,400, there's $1,400 in the pot, and this player is going to have to put $1,400 in to call. So he's getting exactly 2 to 1. He would have to be about 33% to make his hand, when in fact he isn't nearly that good to make his hand. So if he were to call here, he would be making a bad call, and it's very important to allow your opponents to make mistakes. If you put all your chips in the pot, well, now it's an easy fold. He doesn't even have to think about it. But likewise, if you don't bet enough, if you only bet like, let's say 500, well, now let's look at how the math has changed. There's $1,400 in the pot, a $500 bet, so now there's $1,900 here. He only has to put $500 in the pot. He actually has an easy call. You're allowing him to make a good play by calling here. So it's always important to put your opponent to the difficult decisions. And usually in no limit, those difficult decisions start happening right around pot size bets. And I would suggest in a situation like this, after it's checked and you have a nice top pair, looks like you might be up against a flush draw, you need to put pressure and you need to bet about the size of the pot. Very important to make the draws pay on 4th Street. Let's look at another hand. Now here's a situation where let's just say that the player who has king-queen bets $400 on the flop, of course just hoping that he can bluff the pot and pick it up, but you've got the king-10 and you call You're worried he might have queens, he might have aces, he might have a better kicker with his 10, but you call, and you hope something good happens. And now this card comes up. Well, now this becomes a very powerful bluffing situation for this hand, and I'll explain to you why. And this is part of the excitement of No Limit Hold'em, and that is if your opponent, or you for that matter, is sitting with this hand, the King 10, and now the 6 of hearts comes up, and now there's a large bet. Let's say, again, about a pot-sized bet. Remember, these are the uncomfortable sized bets. All of a sudden, you don't know that he has King Queen. You can start envisioning a lot of hands, and I'm going to start bringing them over here, and all these hands are very likely, and they all beat your hand. Just look at this. Now, this is a particularly dangerous card. First of all, your opponent may have started with the 3 sevens. Your opponent may have had a pocket pair higher than a 10. Your opponent may have had a 10 but a better kicker, an ace versus your king. Your opponent also may have started with 2 hearts. Now he's made a flush. And if he didn't start with a flush draw, maybe he had the straight draw, and this 6 made his straight. So all of these possible hands beat your hand. And it's very easy to imagine, well, he's making another big bet, he must have one of these hands. And this is why bluffs work so effectively in No Limit Hold'em. Again, you don't know what your opponent has. You're sitting there with a very fine hand, a top pair with a king, but he's now made a very big bet. If you call, you might be facing a similarly large bet, maybe even a bet for the rest of your chips on the next card, and certainly if you're up against one of these hands, or this hand, you're probably going to be looking at the rest of your chips on the last card, and no one wants to go broke in a poker tournament. So, again, yes, you didn't have any of these hands, but your opponent doesn't know that, and when very dangerous cards, and this is as dangerous a card as can come up on 4th Street, where the straight and the flush draw makes it on the same card, that is very often a very good bluffing opportunity, and you need to take advantage of it on 4th Street. Okay, now we arrive at 5th Street, or the last card, the river card, and this is when you have the most amount of information available to you, and you're going to have to really do some thinking to make some good decisions on the river. This is the street where you can pick up the most valuable bluffs. You can make bluffs and you can catch bluffs. And part of it is, and again, you're going to have to build up your experience through play. You need to make sure that whatever story your opponent is trying to tell you, that it all adds up. And if it doesn't add up, then you need to call and catch the bluff. And there's another important concept I'm going to talk about, and that is allowing your opponent to bluff in situations where it's likely that he might be bluffing. So here's a very common type of hand. We have a flush draw here. We have a good top pair with a top kicker over here with ace-10. And on the flop, let's just say this player bets 400 and this player calls. And now on this card it comes the 4 of spades. And now there's about 1,400 in the pot. And let's just say we make about that pot-sized bet. It's very important that when you think you have the best hand to keep putting the pressure on your opponent. So we're just betting because we think we have the best hand with ace-10. Now let's say that your opponent maybe didn't look at that odds chart and felt like a $1,400 bet was a good call here. And so now he calls 1,400. And now there is 4,200 in the pot. And now on the last card it comes a king. Well, very often here someone with this hand is, well, first of all, they might let the king scare them. But the king doesn't look like it fits in with this flop, so there might be a very good chance that the ace-10 is good. And most players would know that, but most players would just do this with their ace-10. They would bet their remaining 1,900 and just figure, my ace-10's probably good, I might as well bet. I actually think that in a situation like this, you don't want to bet. You want to think about, well, what kind of hands does my opponent probably have? And definitely a lot of them might be drawing hands that missed. It's very important that when your opponent has a drawing hand that misses, to allow them to bluff to you. So in this situation, I would suggest that you check. And very often, a player who has missed a draw, this is a very common occurrence in no-limit hold'em, your opponent will miss a draw, and then they will try and bluff it. They'll try and bluff the pot on the river. And now if your opponent bets 1900, it's very important now to pause and think, well, what are all the kinds of hands that my opponent could have? Well, I bet on the flop, and he called. Well, my ace-10 was probably good then. I bet on 4th Street, and he called. Seems like the ace-10 was still good, you know, or else your opponent probably would raise you. And now the king came up, and you checked, and now he bets. For me, the story's not adding up. It seems much more likely that my opponent's on a bluff, had a draw, a busted draw that didn't come in, and now he's trying to buy the pot. Then maybe he had a king-10. Well, if your opponent had a king-10 and he hit his 3-outer on you, then you lose the pot. But otherwise, it's very likely that your opponent missed the draw, and I would suggest that you call. And in this particular situation, you would probably win, and you'd probably find that your opponent had some kind of a busted draw. Very important not to lose your nerve on the end, and it's very important to be able to add up the story and see that it doesn't add up, and then catch those bluffs on the river.
We now come to one of my favorite parts of the game, and that's reading your opponent. Tells are definitely an acquired skill, but if you do acquire that skill, you'll be able to make some of your most profitable decisions at a no-limit hold'em table. Now we're going to look at some of my favorite tells and some very basic tells. Now you have to remember, no two tells are the same, so you're going to have to apply these things to your specific opponents. But if you do, I think you'll see a big improvement in your results. Well, we now come to one of my favorite tells, and that's the quick call. Very often you can catch a big bluff on the river, not by anything your opponent did on the river, but by how he was betting his hand earlier in the pot. Now you'll see here, Janine bets, and Tony's making a very quick call, and that usually indicates a drawing hand. You see, if he had a pair hand, he would have to consider, is my hand good? Should I raise? Should I call, or should I fold? But when you have a draw, you know your hand is beat. You know you have to hit your draw. So there's no decision. You just put your money in and you hope you get there. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that if later on in the hand the draw doesn't hit and all of a sudden your opponent's making a big bet, you know things don't add up and you know you're probably catching a bluff. Calls like these are about as profitable as they come in no-limit hold'em. Well, we now come to another very important tell, and that is the defensive check. One of the most powerful plays in no-limit hold'em, of course, is the check raise, to trap your opponent into betting and then making a big raise. So it's always important to know whether that check is an honest check or a check for a check raise. And here we see Janine making what I consider to be a very defensive check, but it's a common one that comes up all the time. You see her fiddling with her chips, trying to convince you that she's thinking of betting, and now she makes that check. That is almost always an indication of true weakness. She would not try and indicate that she's thinking about betting. If she had a big hand, she wouldn't want you to know that she's thinking about betting. Always consider a player's motivation for showing you something. So if she's counting her chips like this and really showing you that she's thinking of betting and then she checks, that usually means a very weak hand, or at least a hand that doesn't want to bet, and then you make a big bet and you'll almost always win the pot after a check like that. Now, this is a classic tell. And this is when someone puts the chips in the pot with a little extra added emphasis. Now remember, when you're reading an opponent, usually weak means strong and strong means weak. You see how strongly Tony has thrown the chips in the pot there. He's trying to look strong. He's looking right over at his opponent after he does that. And that is a classic strong means weak tell. You see here, he's cutting off the chips and boom, those last two go in the pot right at his opponent. He doesn't want to appear weak and encourage a call, but of course, if you're aware about tell theory where strong means weak, you're going to see a bet like that and you're always going to suspect a bluff. Well, this next tell I call the stare down. Now it's pretty much the same tell that we just saw, but I really wanted you to see it from Janine's perspective, so we're looking right over her head here. Tony's putting his chips in, and see how he sits straight up, he's looking right at her, and he's staring her down. Again, it's the strong means weak here. He's trying to look forceful. He's being a bit defensive, and he's looking over at his opponent. You see, he's considering whether to bluff. There goes the bluff, the few extra chips, and he sits right up, looks right at his opponent, faces his opponent, squares his shoulders up to the opponent. Again, this is a classic bluffing move. Okay, well, this is essentially the opposite of the last two that we just looked at. Again, we're looking right over Janine's shoulder. And this is the classic weak, mean, strong. Look how quietly the chips are going in the pot. Look at how Tony is not making eye contact with Janine. He's looking away. He looks a little disinterested, but he's very comfortable. He's not tense. He's not sitting up in his chair. He's just trying to look like, nothing special. I don't have a great hand. This is usually means a very strong hand. Anyone that can put the chips in this quietly and this comfortably and this confidently probably has a big hand. These next couple of examples will illustrate why I don't want you looking at your hand before it's your turn to act. We're going to see Janine here. Look at her hole card. She immediately straightens up. She puts a chip on her cards, and she's immediately interested in the action coming around to her. You see, she's in the big blind. Well, if you're thinking of playing a marginal hand here, you're probably going to get played with by the big blind. It's very hard not to give off this tell. You're sitting there. You take a look at your cards. If you're interested, you're going to look interested. If you're not interested, you're not going to look interested. This is a really easy tell to give off, but you don't have to do it if you don't look at your cards until it's your turn to act. Okay, well, we're going to essentially look at the opposite of the last tell, and this is a very difficult tell not to give off if you look at your cards before it's your turn to act. You see here, Janine's looked at her cards. She's kind of looking back at them now. She's not interested in the action. She's just sort of looking down. She's waiting until it's her turn to fold. Well, if I see this kind of tell, I am going to go after her big blind 100% of the time if I'm in late position. This is a classic time when you can deviate from the basic strategy that I've provided you on this tape. And this just goes to show not all tells are the opposite. Here she's being weak, and she is weak. You need to know when someone's telling the truth and when someone isn't at the poker table. We've covered some very specific topics today on this tape. We've covered setting up the game. We've covered the rules of the game. We've covered pre-flop betting strategy, the flop. We've covered 4th Street, and we've covered 5th Street. These are very specific things. What I want to give you now are some general tips that I think are going to help you improve your game more quickly. And they don't relate to specific parts of the hand, but more general ideas. First of all, I really want you to pay attention. The more you pay attention, the more you're going to see, the more you're going to learn of the game. The game is more fun because there's a lot going on even when you're out of a hand. So when you're out of a hand, I want you paying attention to your opponents. You're going to study them. I want you to become a poker psychologist. I want you to figure out what this guy does when he's bluffing and what that guy does when he has a big hand. And that's going to make you money later on in the night or next week or next month. If you study your opponents when you're out of the hand, instead of getting up and picking up a soda or talking to your neighbor, if you sit and you really study what's going on, you're going to pick up so much. And later on, at some other time, you will be able to use that information to your advantage. Now also, along those same lines, I want you to not look at your cards until it's your turn to act. This is going to increase the amount of attention that you pay because you're going to be watching all the action because you don't know whether you're in or not. So you're going to pay more attention before you look at your cards. Also, if you don't look at your cards before you act, you can't give away to any of your opponents whether you have a good hand or not because you don't even know. You haven't looked at your cards. I also want you to be patient. And what I mean by that is when you are losing, you need to be patient about winning your money back. You're only going to win your money back through good decisions and playing proper strategy, not by playing every hand hoping that the deck owes you or that your luck is about to turn. It's very important that you stick with the strategies and realize that you're not going to win every night, but over the long run, by playing properly, you will win. And it is the long run. You're going to probably be playing poker for the rest of your life. If you're losing tonight, remember, you can come back the next day or the next week or whenever it is that you might play again, and through proper strategy, you can win that money back. But you need to be patient. If you're going to try and win it all back in one night, that is a sure recipe for disaster. And the last tip actually comes from Phil Hellmuth Jr., who is one of the great poker observers in the world today. And one of the ways that he's developed
that ability to observe players is he plays a game with himself. And when he folds his hand, he is watching the other players at the table, and he is constantly guessing in his mind what each player has as they act in a hand. So if he folds and it comes down to two people playing, he is going to sit there, he's going to watch very carefully, and he's going to try and think, well, this guy has this kind of hand and this guy has this kind of hand. And then, of course, at the end of the hand, when the cards get turned over, he sees whether he was right or not. But what he's doing by doing that, and over the years he's gotten better and better and better at it, is he's constantly practicing that skill. It's just like practicing free throws. If you practice reading people, you will become a better poker psychologist. And that is probably the #1 strength of Phil Hellmuth Jr., and that is how he developed it. He played this game. I think if you start to do that, over time, you will become a very good reader of players. And that's the key skill in No Limit Hold'em. Thank you for watching this tape. We've covered a lot of ground. I feel like I've pointed you in the right direction, but the only way for you to truly improve your game is to take these concepts that we've covered here and bring them to the table. You must acquire experience, and it doesn't happen overnight. You have to play, invite your friends over, play in tournaments, and your game will start improving very quickly. Another thing I want you to do is I want you to go back and revisit these tapes after you've played for a while. We've covered a lot of ground, and if you're a beginning player, maybe some of the things that I've talked about on this tape haven't sunk in just yet, or you may not quite understand what I'm talking about. You go back, you play for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and you go back and watch this tape, you're probably going to be picking up some new material. This tape will mean different things to you at different points in your poker progression. You've taken the first step, you've bought this tape, you're obviously interested in improving your game. I think if you stick with it, you're patient, it's not going to happen overnight, but if you study the game and you play a lot, you're going to pick up a lifetime skill that's going to bring you a lot of enjoyment. Good luck.